So time value of money, and especially when we're looking at loans, how do we get to mix the two and how do we get to make sense of this? Especially when we're asking you about this idea of interest versus principal, and that's exactly what constitutes a payment when we're looking at loans, especially mortgages, okay? Or amortized loans. So that's what we're gonna do right now. We're gonna make sense of it. We're gonna go through a question in which we're gonna figure out how much or what fraction of a payment represents principal or interest. That's what we're gonna do. So we have this question in which we're asked to compute the repayment of principal, okay? And by the way, just to make it super clear for you guys, any payment when we're looking at an amortized loan will consist of two factors, A and B, in which A will represent the principal repayment and B will represent the interest paid, all right? So the quick little cliff notes here that you want to know is that essentially your interest will represent a smaller portion of the total loan or payment that you'll have to do over a period set of time. And essentially that amount will get smaller and smaller through time, okay? So that's something that you want to be able to understand. And as you go, you'll be able to cover more of your principal throughout the whole period. But in this question, we want to know, by identifying key points, without even using a timeline and placing it into our financial calculator, how can we get a better sense of the amort function and how can we identify the periods that are essentially in our function and then figure out, well, what's the balance, what's the principal, and what is the interest? That's exactly what we're going to do now. Now, the first step that we need to go through is being able to identify key variables. So let's look at the question, let's underline key points, and then let's place them as key variables. All right, so we have the question that says your company is planning to borrow $500,000 on a 25-year, 7% annual payment, fully amortized term loan. What fraction of the payment made at the end of the 11th year will represent repayment of principal? Now, there are a few points to really showcase here, and there are also a few theory concepts to understand to really make the difference between annual payments with monthly payments and so forth. All right, so of course, our loan is $500,000. Our loan is $500,000 on a 25-year loan at 7%. But the key distinction here is that we're saying annual payments, okay? Annual payments are super relevant because if you guys understand what PY is, you know that we're looking at the amount of payments per year. So our N will be slightly different. All right, so now we know that we're doing annual payments and that it's a fully amortized term loan. Essentially what that means is that when we're looking at a fully amortized term loan, it means that our payments will be consisting of interest and principal. And we want to be able to see to what fraction and to what N they're actually represented into the question. All right, so now as I said, we're looking at the end of the 11th period. So once we use our amort function on our calculator, you'll see what this all means in real time. All right, so with that being said, let us identify key points, key variables, and put them just on paper to really have a feel of what's going on. So our present value is equal to $500,000. All right. Our N, well, what do you think our N is? Okay. Our N essentially represents every payment, the total amount of payments that are being done within the full loan. But in the question, they're telling us something super important. They're saying that those payments are done annually, okay? Such that there are actually only 25 years, therefore there are only 25 payments, and not 300 as you would with, for example, a mortgage loan in which there are monthly payments. That's a key distinction to understand. So here, our N equal to 25. And then of course, our interest, our IY, will be 7%. Now, what we want to do, by the way, our PY being 1, and if we look at our compounding periods, in this case, we are, by the way, assuming that it's equal to 1 because there are no other mentions of compounding periods. So in that case, you want to be able to set your PY and CY to 1. That's something that we kind of omitted for a bit, but I just want you guys to remember that if there are nothing that is being said about your CY or your PY, in this case, PY being per one payment per year, then of course PY will be 1 and then CY will follow suit. And your calculator actually does that for you. So now that we have all of our information, let us place this within our calculator, okay? So let's do that step by step. So, of course, our present value will be 500,000, okay? Then our IY will be 7%. Then our N will be 25. Of course, you want to be able to see that your PY is equal to 1 and your CY is equal to 1. And once you have that, you could clear twice, okay? And then we know that we want the value to be 0, such that we can compute for our payments. And then you're going to see that your payments are equal to 42,905 and 26. So by placing all of those key variables within your calculator, you are able to find your payments. All right? So now we know that our payments are equal to 42,905 and 26 cents. But what do we do with this? What does that mean for us? We know that we have our payment for every monthly or annual periods of our loan, but we want to be able to find what portion of that represents our principal and what portion of that represents our interest payment. So, in order to do so, what I want you guys to do is to press second, all right? Press second, and then press right above PV. You're going to see that we have this amort function, all right? And it goes hand in hand with what we're doing right now. We're looking at an amortized loan. So if we go through our amort table within our calculator, we're able to see what actually happens to every payment and what fraction of that represents our principal repayment, what fraction of that represents our interest repayment. So the first thing first is that because in the question we're telling us to look at the 11th year, we need to set P1 as 11, all right? So press P1 equal 11. Then you're going to do enter. You're going to press the bottom arrow to bring yourself to P2. In this case, you're going to set P2 as 11 as well. The reason for which is because we want to look at one singular period. And if you want a visual representation of what this actually means, let us look at our screen for 2 seconds, in which we're essentially looking at what's happening within this specific period. All right? What's happening at T11? All right, at year 11, essentially. So that's what we're doing. So now that you've verified that P1 and P2 are equal to 11, we could go to the next portion. All right, we could go to the next portion. Such that when we look at our principal section, so you're going to see P1, P2, you're going to go down, you're going to see a part that's called balance. For us right now, we don't care about that. We want to go to the part that discusses our principal. Now, as you can see on your screen, your principal should say 15,550 and 84. Then if you go down, you would see that your interest is equal to 27,354 and 42. So let's write them down, okay? Obviously now, if you're really sharp and you know where we're headed with this, you already know what the answer is. But let's make sense of this a little bit more in detail such that you have a better feeling and intuition for what your calculator and what loans are all about. All right? So let's check this out. Principal, as we can see on our calculator, is equal to 15,550 and 84 cents. And we know that our interest is equal to 27,354 and 42 cents. Okay? What I want you guys to remember is that if we go back up to the top section of our screen, you can see that payment is equal to A plus B. A being principal and B being interest. So by that logic, we know that our payment is equal to $42,000, i.e. the sum of A and B. You can check this out on your calculator. You can write them down and you're going to see that they're exactly equal to the same amount. That's also a really good way to give yourself a little way to correct yourself on the exam, to see that you're on the same page. Because, for example, if it gives you a totally different amount, you're doing something wrong. So you want to have that in mind. So, of course, this is equal to principal plus interest is equal to payment. And then with that, because you want to know what fraction of the payment made at the end of the 11th year will represent the repayment of the principal, all that you have to do is do the principal over the payment, which essentially is 15,550.84 over 42,905.26. And that gives you a beautiful number called 36.25%. And that's your answer, just like that. And not only that, you were able to get a really good understanding of how to use your calculator in real time to make sound decisions and to answer questions fairly quickly. Obviously, we looked at a lot of different concepts and we really spent a lot of time on them. But on an exam, you will see that this could take like less than 2 minutes to answer a question like this. And that's an easy point your way, or on an assignment. All right. So what we did here, we were able to identify what a payment really is, what differentiates n based on the different scenarios provided, and how do we find and use the amort function on your calculator to represent interest and principal repayment and identify key periods along the way. So hopefully this was able to help you out.